August 16, 1958. Standing in front of his mother's coffin, Elvis Presley attempted to fulfill a promise he had made to her. But more than 65 years later, his voice breaking midway through her favorite hymn, What Happened Next, demonstrated the genuine strength of gospel music and community in a way that still chills people. Elvis's life had been at its darkest in the days before that point. He received the call that every son fears while undergoing basic training for the U.S. Army at Fort Hood, Texas. Gladys, his mother, had been taken to the Memphis hospital by ambulance. Elvis had persuaded himself that she would recover even though she had been suffering from hepatitis for months and her liver was gradually weakening. Every time she improved. At 3:15 a.m. on August 14, 1958, Gladys Love Presley passed away. She was only 46. According to witnesses, Elvis froze in place as he heard the news. Just frozen, not shouting, not crying. As if he didn't speak, didn't move, or, if you acknowledge it, it might not be genuine. Elvis got on the first jet to Memphis after his commanding officer promptly granted him emergency leave. However, the Elvis who showed up at Grace and that day wasn't the rock and roll king. The 23-year-old boy had recently lost the most significant individual in his life. Elvis hardly talked for 2 days. In the Grayson music room, he sat next to his mother's coffin, clutching her hand and spoke to her as if she could still hear him. "Mama, I'm so sorry," he said. Whispered. The funeral was set for August 16 at the Memphis Funeral Home, with burial to take place at Forest Hill Cemetery. "I should have been here. I should have taken better care of you." However, Elvis had to accomplish something first that was confidential and would only be seen by a select few. In the location where his mother had always felt closest to God, he had to bid her farewell. East Trigg Baptist Church was a little, unassuming church, building in a Memphis neighborhood with a large black population. The church wasn't Elvis's. It was a long way from Grayson. But that was Gladys's church, or it had been before things changed and Elvis got famous, at least when she was younger. Gospel music, the authentic kind that originated from little black churches where members sung from their hearts rather than sheet music, was what Gladys had always cherished. When she could, she would slip into East Trigg services and sit in the back, where she would be accepted by a community that didn't give a damn that she was a poor white woman. A Tupelo woman. Her love of music and Jesus was all that mattered to them. Gladys had grown to love the church's gospel choir, which was conducted by a woman named Sister Oilia Davis. She had told Elvis about their singing, how it brought her peace when nothing else did, and how it felt like heaven was right there in the room. Additionally, Gladys had forced Elvis to make a commitment during those last weeks when she was aware of her impending death. On one of their final phone conversations, she had said to him, "Baby, when I'm gone, please sing for me." Not during the large funeral with all the cameras and guests. "I would like you to join Sister Oilia's choir in singing in the East Trigg Garden. I want to hear you from heaven there." Elvis had made a pledge. He had promised, of course. He would have made any kind of vow to her. Before the formal funeral, a small group assembled at East Trigg Baptist Church on the morning of August 16. Elvis, his father Vernon, his grandmother Minnie Mae, a few close relatives, and Sister Oilia's gospel choir, roughly 12 singers who had loved Gladys and were devastated by her passing, were all present. Elvis appeared to be a ghost when he entered that chapel. His eyes were vacant, but he was dressed in his army uniform as required by law. His movements were sluggish and disjointed, as if he were submerged. He appeared to be in shock, according to those there, and his mind was having trouble processing what was taking place. The coffin had been carried to the front of the church. It was straightforward and unpretentious, exactly as Gladys would have desired. Elvis approached it cautiously, touched the gleaming wood, and stood for what seemed like an eternity in stillness. Sister Oilia Davis walked softly toward him. She was a big woman with gentle eyes and a singing voice that could rattle the rafters. She loved Gladys like a sister, had prayed with her, sung with her, and had known her for years. Sister Oilia whispered softly, "You don't have to do this if you can't." Your mama knows how much you love her. You don't have to prove nothing. Sister Oilia added, You don't have to do this if you can't. Sister Oilia glanced at Elvis, and for the first time since coming, there was more than emptiness in his eyes. They were determined. Perhaps it was desperation. Elvis murmured, hardly raising his voice above a whisper. I promised her. I would sing in the garden, I said. It was her favorite. Sister Oilia gave a nod. She comprehended. Mother's promises are sacrosanct and unbreakable, even if following them could lead to your destruction. Baby, we'll be right here with you, she said. Just get started, and we'll see you through it. Elvis faced his mother's coffin as he stood in front of the tiny crowd. The choir stood behind him, prepared to help in any way they could. It was really quiet in the church. Could hear the breathing of others. Elvis shut his eyes. He inhaled deeply before beginning to sing. While the flowers are still covered with dew, I visit the garden by myself. In contrast to the strong acts he gave on stage, his voice was delicate and sweet. It wasn't a show. This was an attempt to find words for something that had none, a prayer, a farewell. And the sound of a voice hitting my ear. The divine Son reveals. Elvis continued, even if his voice was trembling. The choir behind him started to murmur softly, giving him a comforting bass and letting him know he wasn't alone. He also converses and walks with me. That's when it took place. Elvis utterly broke his tone. A complete break, not just a small waver, as if something had broken inside of him. He made an effort to continue singing and persevere, but he was unsuccessful. His throat shut down. His face began to well up with tears. He also claims that I am his own. The final utterance was hardly audible. Elvis simply stopped after that. Unable to finish, unable to fulfill the vow he had made to his mother, he stood still, gazing at her coffin. The church fell silent for a moment. Not knowing how to help or what to do, everyone was holding their breath as they watched this young man collapse in front of them. Then, from behind Elvis, came the clear, powerful, and loving voice of Sister Oilia. And no one else has ever experienced the thrill we share as we wait there. The song that Elvis was unable to finish was carried forward for him by the other choir members, who gradually joined in, their voices melding together in perfect harmony. They took the promise he was unable to keep and held it for him, as if they were actually relieving him of the weight. Something was the sound that reverberated throughout that tiny church. Really lovely. It was transcendent. It was the sound of love, community, and people standing together to prevent someone from going through hardships alone. In addition to paying tribute to Gladys, every voice in the choir was lifting up her son and letting him know that he didn't have to bear his pain alone. Something inside Elvis exploded as he listened to them sing his mother's favorite hymn. It broke open rather than broke down. For the first time since hearing the news, he started to cry, really cry. Sobs that shook his entire body were deep and painful. And something extraordinary occurred while he was crying. While continuing to sing, Sister Oilia moved forward and wrapped her arms around Elvis from behind. Then someone else in the choir stepped forward. Then another. These vocalists soon surrounded Elvis. Although they hardly knew him, these black gospel singers adored his mother and recognized that there are no boundaries, no color or celebrity when grieving. Only human suffering exists, and the human, a need for comfort. Their voices around Elvis like a blanket, like love, like safety, as they sang all three verses of In the Garden. They sang with life, passion, and the unwavering conviction that grace exists beyond pain, just as Gladys had loved to hear it sung. Sister Oilia turned Elvis to face her at the conclusion of the song. Her speech was steady, but her eyes were teary. "Baby, she heard you," Sister Oilia remarked. "Your mother heard everything you attempted to." Elvis was unable to talk. We sing for each other when we can't sing for ourselves. That's what church is. That's what family is. She heard every word we sang for you. He simply nodded and allowed this woman, whom he hardly knew, to hug him as he sobbed. However, the moment had not yet ended. Still encircled by the choir, Elvis made his way slowly to his mother's coffin. He bent over and planted a kiss on the timber, shedding his tears on the gleaming surface. Elvis then murmured something to his mother in a voice so low that only those closest to him could hear it. Sister Oilia later claimed to have heard him say, "Mama, they sang for us. Just like you wanted, they sang for us." The exact words have never been verified, but for a long time, Elvis stood at the coffin with his hand resting on it before doing something that shocked everyone. He turned to the choir and spoke, his voice rough from tears, but Elvis didn't try to join in. Instead, he just stood there with his hand on his mother's coffin, letting these lovely voices fill the church and fill his broken heart. When the choir finished, he walked to each member of the choir and gave them hugs. "Will you sing it one more time for her?" The choir didn't hesitate. They launched into "In the Garden" again, singing directly to Gladys, as if they were serenading her into heaven. He couldn't find the right words to express his gratitude, but they understood. Sister Oilia would later say that experience in the church changed her perspective on music and ministry. The following Sunday, she told her congregation, "Music isn't just about sounding pretty, it's about showing up for people when they're in pieces and helping them find a way back to wholeness." That's what we did for Elvis Presley that morning, and that's what we should do for anyone who needs it, whether they are famous or not. Before Elvis left the church, Sister Oilia pulled slide and pressed something into her hand, a piece of paper with a phone number written on it. He said, "If you or the choir ever need anything at all, you call this number, please." The gathering at East Trigg Baptist Church broke up quietly. Elvis had to attend the official funeral, where thousands of people would line the streets, cameras would record every moment, and he would have to be Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, rather than just a grieving son. Sister Oilia nodded, realizing that this was Elvis's attempt to pay back an unpayable debt and express gratitude to those who had given him something he couldn't have purchased with all of his wealth or notoriety. The story of what transpired in that church that morning was kept quiet for many years. It wasn't reported in any newspapers or photographs because it was too private and sacred, but those who were present never forgot it. In the decades that followed, when the choir members were interviewed about that day, their stories were remarkably consistent. They all recalled Elvis's voice breaking, the moment the choir intervened to finish the song, and the feeling of pure, overwhelming love in that church. He was just a boy who had lost his mother. One choir member remarked, "It didn't matter that he was Elvis Presley. Grief doesn't give a damn about your reputation." He needed to know he wasn't alone and to be hugged and cherished. When we're in pain, that's all we need. According to friends, Elvis never recovered from the loss of his mother and spent the rest of his life trying to fill the void she left behind. However, in that tiny church on that August morning, surrounded by a gospel choir, Elvis would talk about Gladys with tears in his eyes and the anguish of that loss in his voice. Who cared for his mother and her kid, Elvis felt a deep connection and realized that gospel music was not only entertainment but a lifeline, a community's way of saying, "We won't let you drown in your grief. We'll help you get through it." Elvis had long been a fan of gospel music, having listened to it as a child and released multiple gospel albums over his career. But following that morning at East Trigg, gospel took on a new significance. Deeper for him. It became connected to his mother's memory, to the generosity of strangers who became his family, to the time when he was too broken to sing and someone else sang for him. Years later, Elvis dedicated the gospel album How Great Thou Art, which would earn him his first Grammy Award, to his mother's memory. During recording sessions, Elvis would occasionally become emotional when the backup singers struck a particularly lovely harmony, and those who knew him realized he was recalling that. The story of Elvis at his mother's funeral reminds us that grief is not something we're meant to face alone, that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do for someone who's hurting is to simply show up and be present with them in their pain, and that music, real music, music that comes from the soul, has a power that goes far beyond entertainment. This morning in the church, remembering the voices that had carried him through his darkest moment. Sister Alia Davis sang at many funerals in her long life, but she always said, We got to take someone's unbearable pain and make it bearable for a moment, reminding him that he was loved, that he wasn't alone, and that his mama was in a better place. That morning with Elvis was the most significant one, not because he was famous, but because their little choir got to do what music is really supposed to do. When Sister Alia died in 1993, her family discovered among her belongings a framed picture of Gladys Presley and a letter Elvis had written to her years after the funeral, thanking her once more for what? "I've sung in front of millions of people, but I've never felt music the way I felt it that morning in your church," Elvis said in the letter about what she and the choir had done that day. "You demonstrated to me the true meaning of grace and the gospel. I will always remember that." Despite numerous alterations over the years, East Trigg Baptist Church is still standing today. There is no memorial stone or plaque commemorating the events of that August morning. It is still a private and holy time. Memories preserved by those present and transmitted to future generations via tales. However, for those who are familiar with the tale, that tiny church symbolizes a significant aspect of Elvis Presley. It stands for the man who created the legend, the son who was so devoted to his mother that losing her almost brought him to ruin. Additionally, it symbolizes the compassion of a community. The way a group of gospel singers used their voices to temporarily reassemble a young man who was in pieces. Elvis's pledge to perform in the garden during his mother's funeral was both preserved and shattered that day. He was unable to complete the song on his own. His loss was too much for him. However, in a way, that enhanced the beauty of the promise by demonstrating that fulfilling commitments doesn't always need working alone. Maintaining commitments occasionally entails taking assistance. When you are unable to walk alone, it can sometimes mean letting someone else carry you. The most lovely thing that can occasionally occur when your voice breaks is for other voices to take over and complete your song. Please remember to use the thumbs up button and subscribe if this amazing tale of grace, sadness, and the strength of community touched you. Send this video to someone who needs to hear how important it is to be there for others during their most difficult times. Have you ever had a situation when someone else helped you get through something you couldn't handle on your own? Tell us in the comments section. Remember to hit the notification bell for more undiscovered tales about the human moments behind the greatest music. Myths.